Welcome to today's Explainer. We're diving into a massive technical challenge today, one that honestly goes completely unnoticed by most of us. We're going to uncover the invisible architecture that actually makes it possible to render huge, photorealistic virtual environments in real time. Seriously, whether you're walking down a simulated city street or exploring a sprawling digital landscape, the sheer processing power needed to make it look real and move seamlessly is absolutely staggering. So this brings up a pretty big question. How in the world do these massive virtual worlds exist without literally melting your everyday computer? I mean, if you tried to locally process every single blade of grass, every ray of light, and all those super detailed textures in a huge VR environment, well, the computational demand would just destroy standard consumer hardware. It's just way too much data for one machine to handle. Well, here's the secret. It's all a brilliant illusion. And this illusion is powered by two main things: incredibly clever distributed networking and some highly optimized mathematical shortcuts. Instead of trying to brute force the rendering process right there on your local machine, computer scientists have come up with these amazing frameworks. They distribute the heavy lifting over a network and literally trick your eyes into seeing infinite detail where, well, there really isn't any. Here's how we're going to break it down today. First, we'll look at the challenge of massive worlds, then move on to distributed VR architecture. Third, we'll cover ensuring quality of service, followed by the shadow aliasing problem. And finally, we'll wrap up by explaining cascaded shadow maps.
All right, part one, the challenge of massive worlds.
To really wrap our heads around this bottleneck, we have to talk about frame rates. If you want true immersion where you can look around and interact instantly, you need real-time feedback, right? And to keep the illusion of smooth movement alive, instead of looking like a flipbook of still images, interactive 3D graphics demand a constant frame rate of somewhere between 10 to 50 frames per second. That means the system literally has fractions of a second to calculate and draw millions of polygons over and over and over again, which perfectly leads us to this quote from the sister research. It notes that generating photorealistic images from a massive 3D object database is computationally extremely expensive. Because think about it, we can't just store the entire virtual world on your hard drive like those old CD-ROM games. The files are just way too huge. And we can't download it all right before you jump in, because internet speeds aren't fast enough for databases that size. So expecting your local computer to handle all this rendering? Yeah, practically impossible. Which brings us to part two. Distributed VR architecture. So how exactly do we solve this? Well, take a look at how the data flows in the sister framework's remote rendering pipeline. Instead of your computer downloading the entire world all at once, 3D data and visibility computations are delivered over the network right at the exact moment you need them. The heavy lifting is happening somewhere else entirely, and your computer only gets exactly what it needs for wherever you happen to be looking right now. It actually helps to think of this whole setup like a massive, highly efficient restaurant. Your computer, the client, is basically a waiter holding a really small tray. That tray is a small 3D data cache that only holds enough geometry for immediate rendering. Then you have the front-end server, which is like the maitre d', juggling multiple client requests and balancing the load. And finally, the server-side rendering engine, a whole cluster of networked workstations. That's the kitchen. The kitchen handles all the intense processing of the virtual environment and seamlessly hands it off to the waiter just as the customer asks for it. Okay, let's look at part three, ensuring quality of service. Because for this digital restaurant to actually function smoothly, our waiters can absolutely never trip, right? That data has to arrive perfectly on time. Delivering streamed 3D data just in time requires pinpoint precision. You can't just throw more hardware at the problem and hope for the best. Instead, this framework uses IP quality of service networks, paired with strict response time analysis. By mathematically analyzing how the data streams behave, the system calculates a sharp upper bound for any delay. It basically guarantees that the exact bandwidth you need is reserved, so your complex VR environment arrives smoothly, completely eliminating any annoying stutter or jitter. Moving on to part four, the shadow aliasing problem. Okay, so we've got the networking figured out. We have this powerful server cluster feeding us data. But even with infinite server power streaming perfectly, trying to render realistic lighting and shadows across massive digital landscapes is still super inefficient.
To get why this is such a graphical bottleneck, we need to quickly define a crucial term here, the frustum. The frustum is simply the specific region of virtual 3D space that might actually show up on your screen. You can think of it as your camera's field of view, basically shaped like a pyramid with the very top chopped off. The graphics engine really only cares about rendering what is inside this specific frustum.
Now, the tricky part is how shadows interact with that frustum. When the camera's view frustum overlaps with a light source's frustum, let's say it's sunlight, we run into an issue. If you try to capture everything inside your view using just one traditional shadow map, you're essentially taking a single texture and stretching it over a massive distance. And since faraway objects only take up a few pixels on your screen, while close ones take up a lot, stretching that one map across everything wastes memory and causes really bad pixelation. This is known as aliasing. That's why sometimes when you look closely at shadows in a game, they look incredibly blocky and totally unnatural.
Which brings us to our final section, Cascaded Shadow Maps Explained. This is exactly where those mathematical shortcuts we talked about come into play. Just compare the old way with the new way. Using an older single-split shadow map, the shadow coming off things like characters and terrain features is totally jagged and distracting. But by using a cascaded shadow map, the shadows become beautifully smooth and crisp. CSM fixes this whole aliasing headache by using a high-resolution texture for things near you and a lower-resolution texture for things far away. It keeps the visual error on your screen perfectly consistent.
Let's break down how this algorithm actually works, because it's pretty elegant. It happens in 3 main steps. First, the algorithm calculates z-values to chop the camera's view frustum into several different depth slices. Next, it uses something called a crop matrix to align the light source perfectly with that specific slice. And third, it renders a separate depth map for each chunk. It's actually a lot like human vision. Our eyes focus super sharply on things right in front of us, right? But we lose that fine detail further away. CSIM mimics this perfectly, throwing a ton of processing power at the slices right next to the camera and saving that power on the stuff way out in the distance. Now, to pull off that second step without wasting resources on empty space, the system projects the corners of the camera's frustum slice into the space where the light is coming from. It calculates the minimum and maximum boundaries and builds that crop matrix. What that matrix does is scale and offset the light so it perfectly hugs the bounding box of just that one specific camera slice. This is huge because it ensures every single pixel of the shadow map is used efficiently, preserving absolute maximum precision for the shadows you are actually looking at. When we step back and look at the whole picture, the leap in technology is just incredible. We're moving from traditional rendering, which demands insane local hardware power, gives you blocky shadows, and relies on slow downloads, to a completely new way of doing things. By combining a distributed client-server rendering engine with the brilliant frustum-splitting math of cascaded shadow maps, we fundamentally solve the VR processing bottleneck. The heavy data is streamed flawlessly exactly when you need it, and your computer's graphics processor is literally tricked into rendering beautiful, smooth shadows without wasting a single drop of power on distant, invisible pixels. As a final bit of visual proof, think about a digital landscape where the different shadow map resolutions are assigned distinct colors. The area closest to the camera uses a high-resolution map, the middle ground uses a medium resolution, and the distant mountains use a much lower resolution. But here's the magic. When you remove those debug colors, the pixel shader completely seamlessly stitches everything together. To you, the viewer, it just looks like one flawless, cohesive, massively detailed environment. It honestly is a masterclass in efficiency, so I'll leave you with this thought to chew on. Next time you step into a virtual world, whether you're booting up a video game or doing a high-tech architectural walkthrough, and you find yourself marveling at that stunning, endless horizon, ask yourself, what parts of this reality are actually there? And what parts are just a brilliant mathematical illusion designed to save bandwidth? Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and definitely keep questioning the digital world around you.